Hi. So for this piece, I'm going to be talking about a meta-analysis of several studies looking at self-compassion and well-being and the correlation between the two. So first, we're looking at the questions that were asked, and the first one was, how does self-compassion relate to different forms of well-being? Two, were are there any moderators that influence the relationship between self-compassion and different forms of well-being? And three, is there a causal relationship between self-compassion and well-being? And for this study, causal means one variable correlates directly with another. So do self-compassion and well-being have a sort of a one-to-one comparison? Do they directly affect each other? First, I think it's important to talk about what is well-being. The study looks at two different types: subjective well-being and psychological well-being. Subjective well-being describes how people evaluate their life, including emotional and cognitive judgments. Generally, it can be divided into two different parts: cognitive well-being and affective well-being. Cognitive well-being characterizes the cognitive evaluation of life, so how we think um, our life is going, and that's life satisfaction is generally another word for that. Effective well-being characterizes the presence of positive or pleasant effects and the absence of negative or unpleasant effects. And these are external effects that we might come across. Psychological well-being uh, is a little bit different. It characterizes more a dynamics of producing happiness view of well-being, and it's associated with the pursuit of realization for one's true potential and focuses on optimal functioning of the individual. These two things are slightly different. We can see that subjective well-being looks more at our how we look at our life and how it's going, and also sort of external pressures. And then psychological well-being is very much more focused on internal pressure, internal focus, and sort of becoming the best self. So the method for this meta-analysis was a literature search, and it included published and unpublished works from England, English, in English and German. So um, this does mean that they sort of were lacking some of the other insight that could come from other studies, especially ones um, that are in China, which has done a lot of research on this topic. And the article does mention that as something they would need to, if they wanted to further research this topic, this would be something they look into. Overall, though, they were still able to get 1,433 articles, which is a fairly good sample size. However, only 79 had usable data samples. So again, this is something that they mentioned throughout the meta-analysis, is that this number is definitely not good, and they require more research. However, they were still able to find some interesting things that they sort of looked at through this meta-analysis. These are some of the measurements that they were looking at for the first one, which is the relationship between self-compassion and well-being, um, and descriptive statistics of coded sample characteristics. So this is for question one, and it's looking at overall well-being, cognitive well-being, positive affective well-being, negative affective, and psychological, among other types. It just looks at sample size, and this is just sort of the tabulation of some of the data that they had. Female percentage, which is something they looked at a few times, mean age, sample type, region, things like that, that are just sort of general descriptors of the sample sizes that they were taking, and sort of what they got from them. For question one, they found that each form of well-being had statistically significant relationship with self-compassion. So right off the bat, that's a pretty good sign, because it means that um, sort of being having that well-being is kind of really connected to self-compassion. Psychological well-being have the strongest average correlation coefficient with 0.62, and positive affective well-being had the weakest coefficient with 0.39. This sort of has followed a pattern that we've seen in previous studies as well, so that's a good sign, again, because it shows the data is consistent. Um, and the relationship to psychological and cognitive forms of well-being were slightly stronger than the relationships to affective forms of well-being. And what the study talks about, and what I took from this, is that outside pressure is less important to well-being than your personal mindset. And this is something we've actually seen in class a few times too, with the way that people talk about how we can look inside to sort of see better and understand ourselves better. And so that's sort of what this study is talking about. Um, these are the influence on the measurements for sample number two, for question number two. And this is again looking at the different moderators between self-compassion and well-being in this study. What we have here for question two is that the present meta-analysis found that some differences between the individual forms of well-being regarded to the influence of different moderators. So they found that men have more self-compassion than women, with a difference of 0.18. The research posits that this is because women have higher related constructs like empathy, which means that they are also able to better handle unfortunate events, we'll say, hardships, things like that. Men don't have that. We sort of lack that as much, which means that we sort of have to kind of constantly be pushing ourselves to have more self-compassion if we want to have a better sort of quality of life. Um, and they found that age did not have an effect. Neither did being from Europe or North America. Mostly, honestly, they found that there weren't really a whole lot of factors that did affect it. One thing they did find was that self-esteem was negatively correlated with self-compassion. Um, and they felt like this is probably um, the case because self-compassion is really about internal characteristics, whereas self-esteem is more about looking at other people and basing your worth sort of on external factors. And again, we've seen how external factors are something that don't really work with um, self-compassion very much. So again, it stands to reason that having this looking external always is going to degrade your levels of self-compassion, which degrades your well-being. Moving on to question three, and this was something that's pretty simple. Study was able to discern causal relationship between self-compassion and well-being. And we've seen that through this entire thing. Just looking at the data that we found that the more self-compassion you have, the more care you take with yourself, the better off you'll be. Just in general, kind of that's the way it is. Sort of in conclusion, the research definitely suggests that it is important. Self-compassion is important for well-being, and I can see that, and we can see that through our work in class. Whether it was finance or how to be happy in the workplace, it all came back to sort of an internal look and self-compassion, sort of knowing your worth, understanding how you relate to the world, and having that care towards yourself really makes it much easier to have a good life and to lead a life that is important and meaningful and happy, really happiness. Um, so I guess that's the conclusion from this meta-analysis. Be happy. And to be happy, love yourself. And don't look at outside pressure. Don't look at external factors. Really look into yourself, make yourself better, and work on who you are as a person. Thank you very much. And yeah.